So if you've just joined, everyone is drawing their favorite thing about working in prevention. We're doing this for 2 minutes. And so even if you feel like you're done, just keep moving your pen or pencil on the paper, keep adding to your picture. We've got about 1 minute left. Just keep going. A little bit left. Got about 30 seconds left here. Okay, so that was 2 minutes. Now I want you take a breath. Oh, wiggle your fingers, put your pen down, give a little stretch. Always nice when you're coming into a webinar after a busy day. Now I want you to do the same thing, but you're going to have 30 seconds starting now. So same thing, what you love about working in prevention, favorite thing about working in prevention, but 30 seconds. Okay, so put your pen and pencil down, give a little shake. I want folks to share in the chat what did you kind of experience about this activity? What was different from when you did it for 2 minutes to when you did it for 30 seconds? What did you kind of end up with? How was it? And Jody's going to start reading things off for me as they come up in the chat.
More time, more detail.
Okay.
30 seconds felt rushed.
Okay.
Not as much detail for 30 seconds. More thoughtful, must simplify. Repeating that felt more rushed and it took longer to think about all the details. Not as neat or sloppy with that 30 seconds.
Oh, interesting.
It's hard to imagine have one image versus multiple. And
okay.
It's important to have time to think about it. And, the second time was a little bit more general.
Okay. So I'm curious for folks, thank you. And I'm curious for folks, the second time, what did you find were what did you find about, what you ended up focusing on or the parts that seemed really important?
The second one made me narrow down what I drew the second time. So more succinct, it sounds like, basics.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I was getting nervous. I was like, maybe this isn't going to go the way I thought it went. When I did this activity this week, it was like, oh, this felt like such a connection for the webinar that we were doing today. Also, I just thought it's always nice on a Friday to remember why we all love doing prevention. I don't know about you, but sometimes like by Friday, it's been a long week. I think this idea really that came about for the webinar today was all about, it's really challenging right now. It's really challenging to do the work that we want to do the work that we've set out in our work plans and to be thinking about how to do it and how to do it well. And so, Julie Hibbon and I, when we were talking about the content, we really talked about, this idea of getting back to the basics and really thinking about like what's at the heart first of prevention. Like, why do we do prevention? Why do we do it the way that we do it? Sort of how do we think about it? And then to be able to sort of layer on top of that, how do we do those things virtually? You know, like what's really at the heart of the work that we need to keep and that we need to think about how we do this differently and what we're doing. Many of you probably, like, I can't see everybody, but I'm not sure how many people like rolled their eyes when I put up the story of the river. But if you've been working for prevention a long time, you've probably heard the story of the river. I love this story. It's really this parable about you know, somebody coming up to a river and seeing that there is somebody is floating down the river, struggling and drowning, and so reaching in and helping them to the shore. And then there's someone else in the river, and so you're trying to help them, and then there's someone else in the river. And that is prevention folks, what we really focus on is going upstream or going up the river to say, why are all these people ending up in the river? You know, what's going on up the river that could be the problem, that if we can fix the problem, instead of pulling everybody out of the river, we can keep people from falling in. What I find really interesting about that, and when I was thinking about it in the context of like the work that we do, is this idea of, you know, so when then we talk sort of in, you know, generalities about like, do we need to fix the bridge or things like that. But what I think is really interesting is when you think about it's not just about like going upriver, but that like the river could look really different. Like these pictures on this side, these are all rivers in Iowa. Like one is from I think Bellevue, and one is from Des Moines, and one's from Madison County. And so I'm curious for you to share in the chat, like what if you had to go, if you had to make a guess about river number one, if you had to make a guess about why people might be falling in that river, what might be your guesses? So, you know, put in the chat if somebody ended up, you know, struggling in this water here, like what could have happened that might have resulted in them ending up in the river.
Let's see, open land around it.
Great.
No barrier around it.
Yep.
Appears calm, looks safe, no warnings, shallow, unstable shoreline, isolation.
Great.
Trying to get from one side to another.
And so how about picture two? What and then Jody, if you want to maybe read like just a couple, and then folks can continue to read them in the chat. What do you think might lead somebody to end up in the river in picture two? You want to share a couple of those?
Sliding over the falls could be fun.
Yeah.
Didn't see the dam, and it's calm before the storm.
Okay. And how about picture three? What could end somebody up in the river in picture three?
Looks shallow. Back to the peaceful, trying to get the perfect pick and slipped in.
Okay.
An old bridge.
So what I think is really interesting is that this is the work, right? This is what we think about in prevention. This is why, you know, for those of you who already know me, I'm kind of a goober when it comes to the strategic prevention framework, because we need to think if we're going back to the heart of what we're doing in prevention, we go back to this framework to really think about why we do it the way that we do it. Like, why do we need to like think about community assessment? Why do we need to think about building capacity? The reason why is because if we don't know why people are falling into that particular river, we can't fix the problem. If I you know, if I think that the reason is, you know, we need better signage, and so let's raise a whole bunch of money and we'll put up a whole bunch of signs at the bridge that say, you know, don't stand on the bridge. That doesn't help if it's because somebody is constantly like leaning over a ledge 200 yards away trying to get a perfect picture, and that's where they're falling in. It doesn't matter that I put a sign on the bridge. And so and it's funny because this is all connected with actually when I first started working with Leslie, that like when we were first introduced to this idea of the strategic prevention framework, I was like, oh, trust the process, like build the plane while we're flying it. Like, I don't know about that. And it really, truly did not take long of working through the steps of the SPIF for me to like really grab onto this framework and see how going through all of these steps made prevention so much more effective. And so I think, holding those kind of big picture concepts right now in mind of how important making sure that these things happen. So, maybe I can't walk into a school classroom right now, or maybe I can't have a in-person town hall, but I can still do all of these things. The SPIF is dynamic. The SPIF is intended to start with assessment because it's so important to build our foundation, but then to move us through capacity and to do some capacity building, and then to have really good planning that happens, and to think about how we're going to implement our plan. That we do those in an order for a reason, but we also know it's dynamic. Sometimes we get to implementation and we say, "Ooh, I don't have the right people at the table for some reason that I thought I was going to have. We need to go back and build some extra capacity." Or we've gotten to evaluation and now we see that maybe this isn't exactly happening the way we thought it was going to happen. Let's take 2 steps back, a couple steps back in this process. And so we can still do all these things. We can still make really good data informed decisions. We can make sure that our work is outcome based. I'm not doing a one-time presentation at a virtual school assembly because I know that, talking to somebody for 40 minutes isn't going to have an impact and change their behavior, or come up with some demonstrable outcome. And so I'm going to make sure that everything I'm doing in normal times or now is directly connected to what I really want my outcomes to be. I'm going to focus on population level change. This is like the whole parable of the river and the bridge, or whatever it might be, right? It's about, instead of trying to reach one person at a time and one person at a time, which takes so much effort and resources. And that is not to say that our prevention folks and our recovery folks and our harm reduction folks are not doing amazing, important, incredibly difficult work that's important. But wouldn't that be so much easier if there were not so many people in the river, or if nobody ended up in the river, because upstream we had so much more supports and prevention and all of those things that are happening. And then, of course, prevention across the lifespan, and that all of this only happens when we focus on doing this along with our community that knows our community the best. So, we're going to go through these. So this is maybe new for a few folks. I think this is maybe something other people have been doing for quite a while. So I thought we could just take like a brief couple of minutes to go through each step. And if this works the way it's working in my brain, what I'd like to do is I have given everybody permission to annotate, and I'm going to bring up my little annotate thing also. Ooh, that works. So that's a good thing. I want, in just for 1 minute, if you on your screen, if you haven't annotated before, you've got a little thing you should see at the top, probably at the top, that says more options. If you click on that, you can click on where it says annotate, and you should get a little bar that comes up. For this one, it's going to work best if you click on the T that says text, and then you will be able to write right on the screen. What I would love for you to do is we're going to take 1 minute, and I want you to think about this idea of sort of going back to basics. What are the core services or core elements of what we do during the assessment step? So annotate, click on the text tool anywhere on the screen, click and put your answer. What are the core elements of what we do in the assessment step? Yeah, gathering data, thinking about key stakeholders, gathering information. Yep, great. Great. Yep, folks that have maybe their treatment hat on are thinking about, like, this is the point I, do some assessment. I think about people's history, parallel process in the community of like what's already happened here, what's available here. Great. Information gathering, finding data, wondering. Oh, I love that. In my new work, we talk about that a lot, being really curious about why something's happening and wondering why this might be. Great. Great. So now my question, so I think folks have a good sense of, during assessment, what we're really doing is looking to see like, what do we already know? What do we know about the population? What do we know about the consumption patterns and the consequences and all of these things? So my question now is to share in the chat, what does this look like right now? What can you do that's part of the assessment step given the current sort of constraints and circumstances? So what can assessment look like right now if you're having to do it virtually or socially distanced or in some other creative way? What are the kinds of things that you can do in the assessment step? And Jody's going to read a few of them out.
Gather online data and make phone calls, Zoom if needed.
Great.
Let's see, stay involved in coalition meetings and survey interviews and gather virtual one-on-ones.
Great. Yeah. Virtual. I found, I was talking to somebody who was talking about how actually they had so much more success doing virtual surveys than they had previously doing them. Great. Great. Okay. I'm going to clear these and we're going to do the same thing. Oops, I have to close this on my computer. Now let's do the same thing for capacity. So what are the core like elements that no matter what is going on, the core elements of the capacity step? Stakeholders. Yep. Building stakeholders, identifying current partners, bringing people together and strengthening your coalition, collaborating, fostering relationships, building resources, identifying resources. What do we already have in our community? What do we need around the table? How do we get more the people around the table that have the resources that we need? Offering trainings for your coalition, trainings for your community, thinking about diverse circles of influence. Great. Again, all of these core elements are things that we absolutely can still be doing. They might just need to look a little different. And so in the chat, how can you still do these things, but in a different way? How are they happening differently in your community right now?
Facebook groups,
Okay.
Zoom meetings or virtual meetings, telephone calls.
Okay.
Looks like Zoom is a big one that people are using.
Okay. All right, let's do the same thing for planning. Core elements of planning for those of you who are love and live the spiff. What are the core elements of what the planning step looks like? Communicating about needs. Yep. Don't do it alone. Lots of paperwork, identifying strategies, prioritizing. Come on, I'm waiting. Oh, smart. Thank you. I'm waiting. I'm like, come on, somebody put logic model up there. Like, this is when we take all these pieces and we put it together. We write goals. We make sure that we have a plan for how we're going to implement things with fidelity. Yeah, all of those good things. So in the chat, how can we be doing this work right now? And this is just to get some initial ideas, and we're going to keep sharing as the webinar goes on. This is like a sip sort of, we would say. So ideas in the chat for how this, I think, in prevention, we often would think about planning in terms of like, great, we're going to do a strategic plan. When someone says that to me, I envision being in a room with my coalition with like Post-its all over the wall, right? Big giant Post-its, and people are writing things down. What could that look like right now?
It looks like virtual meetings. This was a good one. Consistent communication with email. Jamboard. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that, but that's one that I think we've been using too more. And then using breakout rooms in Zoom.
Yeah, great. I've also, we're going to do we'll mention a resource that's got some real specific things at the end, but I think about virtual meetings where, you can have a virtual meeting that basically has virtual giant Post-its. You can use mural, or you can annotate like we're doing today, or you can do some other things where you can put people into I'm like I said, I was just learned. We were just at a training that was talking about this week of like you kind of pair people in breakouts first, and then you put people in groups of 4, and then you put those 4 in a little bit larger groups, and let them like share ideas and come to some consensus that way. So, thinking about, it's not about, if I can't get people in a room to do this, I can't do it. It's the idea of, what's important is this, like what's on the screen, right? What I need people to do is to be able to identify the strategies, like what's going to work the best, what's going to be a good fit in my community. What I need is to be able to train my coalition on what a SMART objective is. I want it to be specific and measurable, and all of those things. And then I want to be able to sit down and craft them. So how can I do that in a virtual platform? You guys are great. And we're going to sort of quickly go through the last couple, because I feel like you've got this, which is awesome. So let's actually, let's see, implementation. I think this is one that's tricky, because this is where we think about, right? Like, well, I'm literally going into a school, or I'm, this is where I'm like physically sort of offering this like service. So what are the core services or core things around implementation that come to mind first? What happens during this step? It's evidence-based. Yep. Action. This is where the rubber meets the road. Work the plan. I'm wondering for some folks too, if make sure that you can, when you choose your text, you can also choose a color. So I wonder if I see a couple of people's names popping up without any words. If you're writing in white, we might not be able to see it. Yep, the details, doing it with fidelity, absolutely. Like, how are we doing it with fidelity? Making sure fidelity is happening. So this is one, I think this one's a tricky one, right? What does this look like now? What are people doing now in terms of, we know we want to offer the service, we want to make sure that it's happening with fidelity. What does that look like right now? Let's share some ideas in the chat. Anybody coming up with anything, Jody?
Surveys.
Okay.
Let's see, virtual observation.
Okay. Yeah. So that's so interesting. I almost wonder if that's another one that, like, if you're, you need to have somebody doing fidelity checks with you now, instead of like sort of having to arrange for someone to come to the school, to sit in the back, to do the, go through to make sure that you're doing life skills with fidelity and you're going through all the checklists. You can say to that person, great, I do it Monday through Friday. Can you hop on the Zoom between 1 and 2? That person gets on the Zoom, they watch, they sit with, they're there with the checklist. Like, there are actually some things, and when we think about in this new way that we're working, that because we don't have to worry about transportation and childcare and where someone lives in the county and all of those things, that some things I think are actually there's fewer barriers in our way to doing them, and doing fidelity checks might actually be one of them. That's really interesting. All right, I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to move us ahead to think about, I want to think about cultural competence. What is this? What are the core elements of this that we would think of? Oh, sorry, I don't know. Can you guys annotate? You should be able to do it now. What are the core elements that are part of cultural competence? Being inclusive. Yep. Yep. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Joy. I appreciate that. I kept it in there because it's the name of the step, but certainly we're having a new understanding all the time of how our words and language are really important, and that cultural humility is a term that I think resonates for lots of folks. And I appreciate that. Differentiated per audience, acceptance of folks, diversity, accessible. Yeah. And so thinking about, like, what are the things that we can, oh, sorry. What are the things that we can do? Share in the chat now. Like, what does this look like virtually? and sorry, I'm just going to disable the annotation at this point. What are the things that how can we do this virtually?
Listen.
Okay. What else?
Using pronouns. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Using pronouns in your screen name. Offering tech help.
Yes, we're going to talk about that at the end too. Yep.
And advocate.
Yep.
Oh, offering surveys in multiple languages. That's good too.
Yep.
Closed captioning.
Yep. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I work with someone who has a visual impairment, and she was saying how it's actually really nice for her to be able to join a meeting from her screen at home, because she can make the font as big as she needs it. People might send documents beforehand, and then she's able to look at those and to zoom them in, as opposed to when someone's like handing things out at a meeting, or you're doing things up on a like board up at the front of a room that's really difficult for her. That doing work in this way is actually more accessible for her. Yeah, thank you. Great.
Can I share one more that I think is really
Please.
good?
Yeah, sure. A couple more.
Letting people respond privately in comment boxes. I think that's a big one.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I think we all know too that there's pros and cons to virtual settings in terms of having difficult conversations. Sometimes it's hard to talk about things that need to be talked about in terms of what's happening with inequity in our communities, or what better understanding or training or actions do we need to be taking. That sometimes having those conversations, it can be hard to like create the space in a virtual environment, as opposed to being in a room with other people. But sometimes the opposite's actually true. Sometimes if I feel like I'm sort of like behind the screen, and I can like listen and take in the information, and then I can respond in a way that feels comfortable, like you were saying, Jody, with like I can just maybe then put something in the chat instead of feeling like I have to sort of be out there saying something in front of a whole room of people. That doing some of this training and some of this planning and some of this making sure it's seeped into all the things that we're doing actually lends itself well to the virtual environment. Great. So thank you. Thank you for that. And so that was a way to kind of get at this, just a taste of this from one direction. And now I want to sort of come at it from one other direction. And we're going to also just spend just a few minutes on this. And I just wanted to point out this resource. I think lots of you have seen this already. I really like this resource in terms of like thinking about kind of some foundational prevention things in terms of what we're going to talk about next, which is SAMHSA or CSAP's 6 strategies for doing prevention. There's also great stuff in there about risk and protector factors and all of those things. I'm going to hand it over to Leslie. She's going to talk about each one, and she's going to talk about like what these kind of are, what they look like, give a couple examples of like typically that we would think about. And then while she's doing it, I'm going to have this, if it's okay, Leslie, sort of happen simultaneously so people can get like a good picture of the information together. While she's doing it, similarly to the last activity, it would be great to share some ideas with each other about what it looks like now. Like, what are the kinds of things for this strategy that you have done, or you are thinking like, oh, wait, maybe you could do it this way. So I'm going to ask folks to share that in the chat as Leslie is sharing about each strategy. And Leslie, I don't know if you want to read the chat yourself as you're going, if that's easier, if you want Jody to jump in and read it for you.
Oh, Jody, if you can help, that'd be great.
All
Yep.
right. And then you tell me when to click.
Okay. Yep, go ahead.
Great.
All right, so we're just going to talk real quick about some of the SAMHSA strategies. I'm sure most of you are aware of them, but we want to kind of go through. These are the basics. This is what we do. And sometimes you'll hear prevention is prevention is prevention, and these are really what's at the core of that. But it's also really important that when we're looking at these, we know how they interact with the work that we're doing specifically. So the projects that we're working on, the grants that we're working under, each one of them will have different expectations of this. So the first one of these is information dissemination. And the best way to really think about this is information dissemination is our knowledge strategy. So if you need to teach people about a substance, about a prevention activity that's happening, about, you know, one of those core levels that we're doing, the SPIF, if you need to gain, your audience needs to gain knowledge, you're probably doing it under information dissemination. It's typically one-way conversation. It's like what we're doing here today. You might have some discussion that's going along with it, but for the most part, it's you're the knowledge base and you're providing that knowledge to other people. And so when we're looking at this in Iowa, we're really looking at those opportunities that we have to do one-time presentations when we go into the schools, when we're doing training with our community. This is also where a lot of our marketing campaigns end up, and a lot of those pieces that we're doing when they're educational based and we're trying to educate people about a substance or information there. You might do health fairs. This is also one of those areas where we, as the knowledge base, we could spend hours and hours doing information. I know I would love to do, you know, health fairs and presentations, and, you know, it's a comfort zone for a lot of us, but we also need to really think about the time that we're spending here, because once we've disseminated that knowledge, that's something that a lot of people in the community can help us with. And so we really need to look at what is it that we as prevention specialists need to be spending our time doing, and what are the things that we can do that no one else can do. And so that's really one of the things that when you're working underneath an IDPH project, you really need to be thinking about. And some of them have time limits on information, and that's really why there's time limits on information. Is we don't want to have a resource that's special, like a prevention specialist that's got really specialized skills, spending all their time in this area. So it's really important for you to know what your project's requirements are with that. Some of you will be spending most of your time doing this. So it really does depend on what it is that you're doing and what your focus is. Okay, we can move forward.
And then, so Jody, if folks were able to add some things, maybe do you want to read just 2 or 3? And I think Leslie's probably realized she's going to have just slightly less time than I offered her to begin with. So we'll just a couple, and then Leslie's going to talk, and then a couple, and because I want to make sure we leave space for folks to talk about what's actually happening in the field. Thank you.
So Joy's question is, does the training the trainer fall into information dissemination?
That's a good question. So the trainings themselves, the skills that we're trying to give you, when you go out into the community, that's information based. You're providing the people in the community information, but that's a great segue into the next piece of this, which is when you're in the train the trainer component, when we're providing the training, the one that we had last Friday, moved into what we did on Monday, all of the resources that we're receiving for people who are under SOR and SIPTU, you know, we have a rally hood with all those informations. That's where we get into education. And so education's really that place where we're looking at two-way interaction. It's more than just providing knowledge. It's about changing a person's perspectives, or building life skills, or, you know, providing them with a new competency. And so this is broader than just a one-time presentation. This is a relationship that you're building between you and your audience. So for most of us in prevention, we think of life skills as a evidence-based curriculum we might use. We also think, you know, of a PRI would be another one. So there's a lot of options, but the train the trainers would also fit underneath that. And then before we move on, I just want you guys to be aware that, you know, when you're working under an IDPH project again, there's going to be programs, evidence-based programs that are geared towards specific audiences and specific topics. So again, it's really important for you to understand what program you're doing and why you're doing it. So that goes back to that step. Okay.
Elaine also shared that we can do this by speaking up at coalition meetings, meeting one-on-one, and spreading the message through virtual media.
Yeah, if it's building that relationship and going beyond knowledge, and you're really trying to change those skills, then absolutely working within a coalition and helping them can be education. You just have to be really careful. Does it follow a consistency? Is it something that can be replicated? Because if it can't, then it falls underneath another one that we'll get to.
Can I ask a quick question here? Joy here.
Sure.
So as a part of the relationship building, for example, I'm in the juvenile detention system every week. And very much a part of that is relationship building, right? They know they can depend on me. Right now it's through Zoom, before it was in person. And teaching a variety of lessons, from specific substances to leadership to critical thinking skills, that sort of thing. But I can't count that as prevention education because they're not connected together in an evidence-based
So again, I
form,
can't,
even though it's relationship building.
right. So that, again, one of the reasons why Claire had asked for me to go through these is when we're looking at these are the basics. So this is what every prevention person should know. There's a difference between what's good prevention, which is what the SAMHSA strategies are, and what your project will allow. And so there's a lot of different reasons why underneath IPN, for example, you have very specific evidence-based programs that have research to show exactly it's been effective in making change in these areas, and that's education, as opposed to maybe a different project that you would work on that might not be IDPH focused. So it's hard to say you can or you can't do something, or what's education or what's not. Don't get caught up on the word relationship, because relationships are something that's important across the spectrum. So, when you're doing the SPIF work in general, every step of the SPIF is about building relationships. So the real important piece to remember with education is that there's a two-way back and forth, and that you're really able to assess and evaluate what skills were gained or what competencies were changed. So you really need to be able to look at that and say, yes, I can see a difference and I can duplicate it. Okay.
And of course, the challenge with the juvenile detention population is that you don't necessarily have the same kids.
Right.
Right.
And so then that's when you really need to get into looking at specific programs that are geared at that specific population to make specific change. And there are some out there. So if that's something that you're working on and you're interested in, I really recommend that you reach out to your IDPH consultant and make sure that you're working with them on, is this a program that I can use and why you want to use it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. So then positive alternatives, this is a tricky one for us because overall the strategy is really about providing consultation or providing support to communities who are trying to give alternatives to substance use for populations. So this is really about discouraging use, but we can also get really stuck in this, right? So Claire kind of called me out. I've been around for 20 years. So when I first started, we were doing red ribbon dances, and we were doing lots of like youth after school programs. We would do things like fifth quarters, where after the football games we'd get together. All of those things are positive alternatives. All of those things would fit as prevention strategies. But again, going back to what I said at the beginning, is that a good use of prevention specialist time? And so most of our projects underneath IDPH say you can provide consultation here, but you're not be person responsible for making these things happen. So, okay, we'll speed it up. I know we got to get going.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. Environmental strategies. So these are those strategies that we use that are going to change either written or unwritten policies and procedures. These are things that you're going to change the environment, either at the community level, it could be at a workplace, it could be at a school. So these, most of our projects under IDPH were focused on some sort of environmental strategy, working on making those changes. Community-based processes, this is you providing support to your community. So however that might look for your community, this is where that capacity piece that Claire talked about really comes into play. So for you, it could be you've got a fledgling coalition, or you don't even have a coalition started. So how do you work to with volunteers in your community, with others in your community, to build that coalition and to provide them with skills? For others, you may have a strong coalition in your community who is really active and has their own funding. And this would be an opportunity for you to maybe do strategic planning with them or help them to build a sustainability plan. So this is really about you meeting your community where they're at and helping them to make the changes they need to make in order to affect substance abuse in the community. Identification of problems and referrals. The big thing I want to make sure you guys all are aware of here is that the title is tricky because you're not actually identifying the problems themselves. And I think that really gets tricky for us in prevention. So when you get somebody underneath the strategy, you should already know whether or not they have a substance abuse treatment need. And so if they're in need of treatment, then that's where they should be, is in treatment. So what we're really looking for here are those people who have been assessed that they are right on the cusp. They've used, maybe that they have some interaction with it, maybe they're at a high risk of use. And we want to get them on a different direction, a positive direction. We want them to have positive outcomes. So, you know, PRI, Prime for Life, is a real example of one of the strategies or one of the activities we might do underneath the strategy.
Leslie, can I add too, if you don't mind? I think also the idea of like it's not our sort of lane to know this piece, but to take action in terms of like, oh, I have a question here. I think what I'm going to do is refer this person to, you know, and so like the place that I most often interacted with this was if someone was referred to diversion and they came to diversion, you know, we required parents to come with them. And I was sort of like, I didn't have clinical training or anything like that, but it was sort of just my like listening that I would hear like, ooh, this story feels a little different maybe than like this was sort of a one time and you got caught and you're going to come to diversion. This feels like maybe there's something else going on here, in which case I might say to the you know, parent and the student, they came together, you know, I might say to the parent and the student afterward, like, hey, you know, if you're interested, here's some information about, you know, Sassy and in Dubuque, and like it's free to just call them up and like ask them some questions, you know. And so like it wasn't my job to say this person has a problem or they don't. It was my job to say, oh, I wonder if like it might be helpful to connect you with a higher level of service, or if you're getting referred to do strengthening families and it seems like maybe universal prevention is not a good fit, I have someone else in the community that I could say like, hey, I think this program might be a better fit if you want to call them. That, I mean, that's where I most often, I think, interacted when I was doing community prevention itself, if that's helpful.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And
does
it brings
this go
up
beyond than just referring, you know, to resources like My Life Might Quit or Your Life Iowa,
that
or I mean,
could be
because this is
part of
obviously a selective group, right? Or indicated.
Yeah. So yes,
Right.
So this would go a little beyond that, because this would be a group of people who, you know, it wouldn't just necessarily be you'd be sitting at a health fair and you'd be providing that information. This is a really, I guess it's very important to realize that this one is a tricky one. We recognize it's a tricky one, and so it's always good. It's better to communicate and be, where does this fall? It's okay to ask questions about this one. It's hard for us to really pinpoint specifics with this one on what is and what doesn't fit underneath this. For IPN, you have very specific expectations of what you can do underneath this one. But, you know, as your agencies change into probably providing more linkage to care and, you know, maybe experts in doing those brief interventions, this can be a harder one for us to really pinpoint into, you know, what is and what isn't. So I would really recommend you having conversations about this one.
Yep. Thanks, Leslie.
Yep.
Jody, anything from if folks were still sharing in the chat throughout that of some ideas they have of, you know, how they're sort of working on this currently? Do you want to pick a few out and shout them out?
There is nothing in the chat box.
Okay, everybody was so into what Leslie was saying, not chatting at the same time. All right. So let's move on to this new section, which I'm excited to have some opportunity to talk to some folks that are doing this, where lots of us are doing it. We just kind of reached out for some folks to be brave enough to give us a couple minutes. So I'll introduce each person, just a brief sort of who they are and what they're going to talk about, and then they're each going to talk for. I said to Leslie, if I told folks that they had 3 minutes, then hopefully they would take less than 5. If you tell people they have 5 minutes, they'll talk forever. Or maybe that's my own experience. So just a quick snippet, just a couple of minutes about what you've brought for today. So first, we're going to have Chelsea Erickson. She's a prevention specialist from CFR. She's going to talk about the importance of connecting face to face, even if it's virtually.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. I'm a prevention specialist with Community and Family Resources, like Claire said, but I am a newbie, so I've only been with CFR for about 3 months now, but I have a background in public health and prevention work that I've done in the past. But I wanted to mention that first off, I think we can all agree that COVID has really reshaped the way we work in the world. And it's really pushed our capabilities of reaching one another to the limit. So traditionally, in our work, we've relied on bringing people together in person in a physical space to kind of brainstorm and share ideas and build support. But now that we're working more remotely and meetings are virtual and community events are just not happening right now, I think it's important to reiterate that face-to-face interactions are still really important, especially in the realm of prevention work, because in-person communication will always be considered the most effective form of communication, especially in times of change like we're going through right now. So I guess I just wanted to mention that we get comfortable in our offices, in our little small world, whether that be in the office or at home. And it's easy for us to communicate via email, but also making note that a lot of people get numerous emails per day, and it probably isn't the best way to communicate with one another. So I think that I found personally that it's crucial that we take time to make phone calls and chat with people in real time, because speaking directly over the phone helps us avoid any miscommunication in the long run. And it's also an opportunity to get to know people on a more personal level, since speaking directly gives us a chance to kind of show our personalities and our humor, which I think we need so desperately during these times. So making sure we're making those phone calls and we're trying to set up phone call meetings with people. And if we can't do that, can we schedule those meetings in person as much as we're able to do? I found that working in schools and with certain organizations, people are still meeting in person. It just takes that ask. You just need to ask them, can we meet in person? Are we able to do this? Because it's still the best way to build relationships in general, meeting each other in person. And it's also a great opportunity for us to build rapport that we may not be getting in this virtual world. And if we can't do those two things, if we are utilizing virtual platforms to video chat and meet, can we do that one-on-one like Claire had mentioned before? Can we do it? Can we create that one-on-one virtual meeting with each other so we can at least see each other face to face? And if it's more of a big group, like a coalition meeting or a community meeting where there's multiple participants, making sure that we are creating activities like icebreakers or breakout rooms so that we can get to know each other when we're in those environments. So through icebreaker activities, getting to know people, and then when we break out into smaller groups, making sure that we're intentional and reaching out and being like, we're in the small group, who are you, what do you do? Getting to know each other that way, I think, is super important, so that we're still able to connect and network and take away important contacts that maybe we could use in the future. So just reiterating being intentional with how we're meeting with one another and making sure we're trying as much as possible to make phone calls and meeting each other in person as much as possible. So
Thank
that's
you.
just what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Chelsea.
You bet.
I love that what I heard in everything that you said also was, and that was so beautifully like prefaced, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I think this idea of just it being so intentional. And so, if you're in a space that you're able to socially distance or to figure it out, like, that's, under your agency and how things are working, but also the idea right now of like, that is still so important that it's about the person to person relationship. So hopping on Zoom with that one person, creating those opportunities with the person, like all of those things that like I just appreciate the things that you offered around like it's about intentionally building relationships, and that's always like prevention is prevention, and like Leslie said, and it's always about relationships, and we can in doing that. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing, which also then like leads us as Chelsea kind of said at the end of like, and when you can't do it in person, like these great ideas for thinking of thinking about how to create that virtually. And so Alexis Green, also a prevention specialist from CFR, is going to talk about the additional preparation that's needed for virtual meetings and classrooms and some different tools that help that to be engaging. So Alexis, if you want to pop up.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me speak today. Chelsea, you did amazing. So what I'm going to be talking about is just additional prep work that might be needed if you're doing something virtually, and then different things that you can use to try and make it more fun and more engaging when people are attending a meeting virtually, or if you're teaching virtually. So first, let's start with prep. Something that I have found super helpful is that if I, for instance, last week I had to use Google Meet for the first time when I was teaching virtually with one of the schools in my community. And something that was super helpful when I was using a new platform was inviting a coworker to just kind of like go through it with me, so that I could figure out how it works. And then also with Google, it was super nice because it was super compatible with different things that I wanted to do, like Jamboard or a Google Doc. Everything like that was super nice and easy. And so it was nice to be able to run through that first with someone else who was there. I will also say that kind of messing around with like Google Docs, Jamboard, and taking time to really familiarize yourself with those platforms is super helpful, because even after trying to run through everything before, when I shared the Jamboard with the class, I still forgot to change the sharing properties so that people could edit on it. And so luckily I'd familiarized myself with that platform enough that I knew how to like to go in right away and fix that. And so really just setting aside time to familiarize yourself with it. And even if it seems silly, just clicking on random buttons, it's super helpful to figure out what you're going to be doing later. And then transitioning more into the different resources that you can use. I love that IDPH introduced Jamboard to us a couple weeks ago, I think, on a training. I loved that. I think it's great. My students have loved that too, that I've been working with. The curriculum that I'm doing right now is Project Alert. And so I think we all know that with Project Alert, when you're in person, you're lugging around like a flipboard with you when you're going places. And so it's been super convenient with Jamboard to just be able to pull it up and have it at the ready all the time. It's not something that like I can forget at the office, or something that I have to use that's like cluttering up my space, right? It's just something that's there, super easily accessible, super easy to like pull it up right away if one of the kids has a question about something that we went over a couple days ago. That one has been super helpful with me. That's mostly all I have on that. I do want to add one thing that's unplanned, but you were talking about coalitions and how it can be kind of frustrating in the implementation stage when we don't have stuff going on in the community. And this is totally unplanned, and I'm just going to touch on it super briefly because someone else might be touching on it later.
Yeah,
But,
no, this is great because after you, Kitty's going to talk about virtual coalition meetings. I feel like this is perfect. You absolutely, like, we want you guys to share like what's really happening. So this is great. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'll just stay super briefly on this, but something that's been super helpful, honestly, with COVID is that with a decrease in community events and like being able to go out into the community, been able to take time with the coalitions to really try and capacity build, figure out like which people in the community, which populations in the community that we're missing, that we want to have voices at the table and try and problem solve those things. So just kind of like building capacity within the coalition has been a great way to stay active in the coalition, even when we don't have community things going on.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you. So what a perfect transition to Kitty, who's going to share. She's a Kitty. Please make sure I'm sorry if I'm not saying your last name, Boggle, I think correctly. And she's also a community specialist. She's from CETA, and she's going to talk additionally about how coalitions are able to keep going by meeting virtually.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Bogle, but everybody gets it wrong, so don't feel bad.
Actually, I want you to know that I had it right and somebody else told me to say it differently. Not that it matters, but I apologize for not having.
No problem, no issues. So I thought what I'd just talk about is, particularly what that I've been dealing with. So, pre-COVID, I was seeing a lot of my coalitions that you would get that small core group that seemed to be the only ones that were there every month. They're always there, but it's a very small core group. And, after March, when a lot of things went virtual, everybody's having to learn Zoom and all the other platforms. Actually starting to see a lot more people attend the coalition meetings that we hadn't seen before. They were members, but it was so much easier for them to just click on their computer while they were in their office, attend a meeting rather than having to leave, drive to where the meeting was, and so it's kind of interesting that I'm seeing some of my coalitions that have actually gotten bigger, which allows for more input, more ideas. The other thing that I'm seeing too is because there aren't a lot of community events, my coalition members are getting really, really creative about the things that they can do and how they're going to get some of these things that they've always done, how they're going to be able to do it, and now without a lot of face-to-face things. So, I think it's good and bad. And I think also it allows for, at least for me, to share information with a lot more people. A lot of times you just send the information to the person who's in charge, the chair of the coalition or whatever, and then it gets blasted out to a lot of different people. So I think that's helpful. I do agree with the fact that there are some of those that we are missing in our coalitions. Maybe some of, the people that aren't quite as comfortable with tech, people who don't have access to Wi-Fi or computers. So, I think as coalitions, we need to stop and think about those people that we are missing and how, in the world that we are in now, we're going to keep them informed, keep them a part of it, get their ideas broadcast, different things like that. So that's just kind of what I'm seeing, at least with my coalition.
And Kitty, that is such a perfect.
Out here.
Oh
no! Yeah, because of that thing. So now I'm on my phone on data.
I think somebody needs.
If I don't get credit for this.
Thanks. Sorry, I thought you had a question. I think she just was unmuted for a second. What if I wanted to say sort of like hold that thought, because actually a few of the resources that we're not gonna unpack them, but I'm gonna like share them with folks to research, to look at the end, speak to exactly what you're talking about of like, are we thinking about like different ways and technology needs and like those who are maybe tend to be marginalized, or thinking about like what is that access maybe different and how can we level the playing field and all those things. So I thank you, because that was also a perfect sort of segue into our some additional thinking I think we all need to do.
Well, and one of the other things that I found too is just having more people that come to the coalitions, like teachers and different things. They're using different formats, and some of these are really cool. So it's really kind of interesting, or informative to learn the new, tech that's out there and things that we can use, as prevention specialists. So, I really get kind of excited when I learn like what the schools are doing or what other agencies are doing. So yeah, I think it's kind of helpful. So
I was thinking too, when Alexis was saying that about, how many of us just sort of get nervous for like, oh my gosh, I have a meeting on this platform I haven't tried before. And I was thinking about the idea of, like Alexis is what a great, like sort of proactive solution to say to a coworker, but like how many of us do that then with our coalition members of like, hey, we're going to try this new thing. It's called Mural. I know that like tech's not your favorite thing. So if you want to hop on, a few minutes ahead or like, hey, let's have virtual coffee. And while we're on here, we're going to use this cool new interactive tool at our coalition meeting next week. Like, let's practice it so we can both be comfortable to use it. I think like that part of also being proactive maybe is helpful to get more engagement as well. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's a great point. Thank you. And so last but certainly not least, I think maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm not sure, Katie or Lisa, who's got the most years in prevention, but Lisa definitely has more. I think Lisa had already been working many years in prevention when I started. So additionally, somebody that I've always looked to as a resource and a mentor. So Lisa Guest, also from CETA, I'm wondering if it says on it. So you didn't put your official title on here. So you can say whatever you want to say when you hop on, Lisa. But Lisa is just going to share briefly about success of keeping DUI classes going virtually. So, I think a lot of evidence-based things that are education that had to shift to moving virtually. So Lisa, do you want to take maybe 3 minutes to give, or 3 or 4 minutes to give the highlight, and then we'll also maybe have some time for a couple of questions.
Sure, Claire, that'd be great. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
I wanted to try and come up with a new word. I mean, Chelsea said she's a newbie. Am I an old bee? I've been around for many, many years, as Claire said. And one thing we've really focused on is keeping our PRI, which stands for Prevention Research Institute. We have all the acronyms in prevention, so it's important that we do explain them because not everybody might know what those are, but we're offering a 12-hour drinking driver's course virtually. And it's hard to believe it's been almost 1 year since we started working remotely. In my position, I am the prevention supervisor, so I supervise 1, 2, 3, 4 grants and then our DUI program. And with that, everybody started working virtually, remotely in March. I started about the 1st of April because we have technology issues here in Southeast Iowa. And depending on who your internet carrier is, you just have to deal with what you deal with. But we're able to continue offering this program virtually. And of course, Kitty is one of my facilitators, and then Eileen's the other one. She's on here too. But they've really worked hard with clients with technology, whether they're using their phones or using laptops, and trying to make this 12-hour class in a virtual manner interactive. They do polls, and those help keep people very focused. And so far, we've had a lot of success, and it's going very well.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I'm thinking what I would love to do, if you all don't mind sort of like continuing to be ready to speak up, I'm going to take just a couple minutes because I think it like leads sort of well from this. I'm going to take a couple minutes to go through the tools that I mentioned, and then I want to be able to sort of then use a chunk of time, the chunk of time that's left at the end for some additional questions that anybody who's spoken already or anybody else can answer. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of tools that I thought might be helpful. I think we could, like, there's so much information right now, right, about like how we're doing this and what's available. So these are just a few that I thought might be helpful, and it's interesting how well I think they sort of marry with things that have even just come up in the last 5 minutes. So the first one, and And I kind of liked this. I just pulled this as like a little snippet from the document, but it's called Inclusive Virtual Community Engagement During COVID-19. And this was developed from the Colorado Office of Health Equity. And it's all about the thinking beforehand, like the planning for virtual engagement, thinking about the timing. They have a whole section on, they call it digital justice and technical access. And so some of the things that I've heard already here, does something require downloading an app? Do you have to be, can you do it on a smartphone? Is it intuitive? Is this something that can be accessed by people that are non-English speaking or low literacy? Is it, do we have to think about people's internet access? So there's just all these nice questions that I could see a coalition, really digging into a document like this to think about, like almost as like a checklist of, have we thought of these things? And in our particular community, what would the options be? Like, can we provide a way to have better net internet access, or can people call in? Some of the things that we've talked about already. How do we sort of level the playing field during a meeting for folks? And then they also give some ideas as well of like, let's also think about, being present at the coalition meeting is really important, but also, are we doing other forms of communication that lend themselves well to the current circumstances? Maybe it's time to put a newsletter together. Maybe it's time to not just sort of email when there's a big thing, but email, a little more interactively. And so I like that this tool has some kind of real concrete things to think about. The second tool I wanted to highlight is community engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. And this one was through the Urban Institute, and it was I also, for this one, I wanted to highlight, and I'm going to actually, you won't even have to click the link. I'm going to attach them right to the email. This one has both on page 5, it talks about tools for engagement, but it talks about non-digital tools as well as digital tools during the current time. Because I think it's great. We're all like, great, we want to get on Zoom and we want to use breakout rooms, but that doesn't work for everybody. And so they have some real, I love that, Chelsea right in the beginning mentioned some of these also of old school. They literally talk about having, make phone calls and have a phone tree of I'm going to call you and then you're going to call these other 2 people. And how are we going to get this information out in a way that doesn't involve having to, have internet access? They talk about, they have a whole section in here that I sending, who doesn't love to get mail? Like, when was the last time you got something in the mail that wasn't a bill? I don't even get my bills in the mail anymore. I get, coupons occasionally. And then I also appreciate that they have a section on best practice for community engagement. And then I think this was the resource as well, that they have a whole section that kind of walks you through some actual different tools and the pros and cons of each, which, we've mentioned there's lots of different ones and it's hard to kind of know which one is going to be the best fit for what I want to accomplish. Like if I'm in a school and I want people to be able to be interactive, like Mural or Jamboard or one of those things, does that work better in Zoom, or is it easier to navigate in WebEx? Or, I think it's nice to have a starting point for here's what's kind of helpful about using this platform or this tool, and here's what people have kind of found the drawbacks to be. So I thought that might be a helpful resource for all of you. And then lastly, I'm not sure how many of you go to CADCA for resources or are familiar with CADCA. It's the a national coalition of anti-drug coalitions. But I appreciate when I was looking on their website for some resources that one of the things that's on this page, if you navigate to it, once you get the slides afterward, are real time sort of these are things that people are actually doing. Because I think it's great to be like, here's what you could do, and here's what you could do, and here's a great idea. They actually collected these from folks who are doing prevention in the midst of COVID, to tell them some of the innovative ways that they've been making adaptations or making the work happen. And they have it kind of all grouped out. So you want to know oh, I'm trying to do data collection. How do I even do that right now? They've got 3 different examples on there about how coalitions navigated that process currently, how they did community resource guides, how folks have done media campaigns and PSAs, how medication disposal has happened in the current environment, and outreach to parents. And so I know that we all get tons of like, I literally have a file on my computer that says to read later, and I see all these great things in my email, and then I stick them in that folder for when I have time to get back to them. So I wanted to kind of be selective, and I really would, and neither of these is very long. I printed them off, and they're all pretty easy reads. So if you have the time, I think these are 3 kind of solid go-to resources that I would recommend. You might take a little bit of time when you get the resources after this webinar to download and to flip through, and also to share with your coalition and share with other folks, and think about think about this together. I'm going to actually skip that for 1 second, and I'm just going to give a real quick reminder that following the presentation, just so you guys remember, you'll get a copy of the presentation, a link to the recording. I'm going to share some resources. I am also going to maybe reach out to Alexis to find out more about Jamboard, because I don't know that particular one, and she speaks so enthusiastically about it. I might reach back out to her to get a little info that I can send out to you guys. Give me about 2 weeks, and sometimes it's like literally 2 weeks. I actually just work in the position doing these trainings on Friday afternoons. And so if I don't sort of like get to it on a Friday, sometimes it takes me another week to get to it. So give me about 2 weeks, but I'll get everything out to folks. And I am really excited. I want to give just a quick shout out. We're still getting the flyer approved, but this will be out soon. I'm not sure how many of you might know or remember Jody Swope. She's done a lot of trainings for Iowa in the past. She used to work for the CAPT, and truly someone who, I really have seen as a mentor. I worked with her for a little bit when I worked with the CAPT. She's extremely knowledgeable about prevention. So I talked to her about doing a webinar for us, and I'm really excited that she's going to do this webinar for us on managing stress and building resilience for prevention professionals. The little blurb I'll just give you real quick. This webinar will examine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the prevention professionals' wellness and work. We've now lived through a full year of isolating distance, disrupted schedules and plans, and fractured social networks, both at home, both at work and personally. As a result, we're all experiencing varying degrees of impact from chronic stress. And this webinar, she's going to explore concrete strategies for building resilience, both personally, and how to intentionally then integrate that into your prevention work. So I know I'm really actually looking forward to Jody being the presenter for next month. And just a reminder that it's part of our monthly prevention focused webinars. So even if you don't know what the topic is, put it on your calendar that they're always the first Friday of the month from 1 to 2:30. If you are on this webinar today, you will be on my distribution list in case you would like not to be. You can let me know. Otherwise, I add you to my list, and you'll get the flyer and the registration information direct to you by email as soon as it's available. And then I want you all to hang out so we can have a few minutes for questions. We've got like 8 minutes at the end here, and I can also stay on a few extra minutes if that would be helpful. And so, but before I forgot, Jody, if she hasn't already, will paste the link into the chat box, and I would really appreciate it if when you're ready to go, and she'll paste it again at the end in case we get lots of questions in the chat. But right at the end, while it's fresh in your mind, it's less than 2 minutes. If you would just click on the link to give us some feedback about today, that would be helpful. We kind of wanted to find a balance today of like giving some information and some foundational stuff, but hearing from the field. And I wish, we had sort of like had even more time, but we'll leave time for questions. But the reason that we invited additional folks today was a specific request that came out of these surveys that someone said, hey, we'd love to hear more voices from people that are on the ground doing the work. And so I was like, great, let's build that into the next webinar, and invited some folks to do that for us. So we do read these. We try to incorporate your feedback into future trainings and improve. So with that, I want to give us we've got 7 or 8 minutes for questions, and now I can see my chat. How delightful. So what is this bringing up for you? What questions do people have? Feel free to give a general question, or if somebody said something already, if Leslie or Chelsea or Kitty or someone, you want to ask a specific question, the mic is open, the chat's open.
There is a comment in the chat box from Kathy that she concurs with Kitty that we have seen a marked increase in people attending substance abuse prevention trainings via Zoom versus in person.
Thanks, Kathy. Feel free to unmute or to share in the audio. What questions do you have about how to kind of take this, like, take it and move it virtually, move it socially distanced, move it creatively in some other direction?
This is Joy here for Alexis. We really also like the Jamboard here, but the platform it prefers is Google. Do you know if it can work as well on another platform? Because our IT people want us to stick with Microsoft E or something, whatever that is. So while we have access to Google, that is not the preferred platform our IT people would like us to be using.
Sure. I have only used it on Google Meet, but I know actually Leslie, yeah, I know that like I think a training that Leslie did last week used Jamboard via Zoom. So she might
Okay.
be able to talk more about it. Or
Okay.
maybe it was Amy that did it. I don't remember.
So Jamboards are a Google app. So you have to use Jamboard, but they're with Google, but there are other options out there. So I think Claire brought up Mural. There's a couple of others that have similar things that you can use within them. So there are other options that are open apps and not just in Google.
Okay. Because we also like the Kahoot, but Kahoot is pretty cost prohibitive. PRI uses it, but you know, they have a bigger budget than we do down here.
You know that Mural is free. I'm trying to look. I think this community engagement resource that I'm sending I think lists a couple. I don't know if other folks want to share in the chat if you know of a couple. I'll do a little digging between now and when I get things out too. So and folks want to share also of, you know, what seems to kind of be the most, because this is the thing too, like it's not just about us using it, it's about like your coalition member who, you know, before all of this had never even been on Zoom. And now we're like, hey, use this collaborative tool in real time to work on a document with me. Like, we want to know like what's the most like user friendly experience as well. And so if folks want to share in the chat, I'll do a little crowdsourcing between now and then also, and I can share that back. And I would love if Jody makes a note of that and emails it to me.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks. Great question. I'm looking to see if it's in here too. What other questions for any of our presenters or just for your other prevention folks on the call? And I'm looking, yeah. So one of the documents I'm going to send talks about, you know, here's some different online brainstorming tools such Mural, Google Docs, BoxNote, and then like it talks about different collaborative project planning tools, which I haven't even heard of any of those, such as Shape, Miro, Whimsical, talks about different survey platforms. So there's some good ideas in this resource too that hopefully you can do some messing around with, as Alexis suggested. Oh, Gather was shared also. Thank you. Does anybody want to share? I mean, we certainly can open it up. We had, you know, identified a couple people ahead of time, but do folks want to share something that you've done? I mean, our Kitty, I was interested when you were talking as well about, you know, talking about how your folks have had to be really creative to think about, like, we did this thing in person, you know, before we always sort of had this event in person. I don't know if you want to share, Kitty, like maybe something creative of how you've like shifted that in this last year. And then if other people on the call want to jump in to share examples as well.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of people have done this, but a couple of my coalitions have always done back to school things, you know, health fairs, different stuff like that. And, you know, that was just not feasible. So then they were doing the drive up, you know, so where they would have everything ready, cars would drive up and they would hand things off. They were, you know, I know other coalitions or other organizations were doing that for, you know, like food and lunches for kids as well. So, you know, they had to really kind of think outside the box with a lot of the things that they were doing. You know, as far as some of those activities. And I'm finding, you know, when I want to get a hold of retailers, I've got trying to get a listing of like all of their emails, so maybe I can get all the retailers together on a Zoom. I mean, I'm just, you know, we're having to get a lot more creative with the things that we have done that we've always done in person, and we're no longer able to do that. So yeah, it's really amazing some of the things that they're doing. So
Do you mind if I share? I had two thoughts while you were talking. One is, and someone correct me, I think you used to be able to get the list from the ABD of all the, well, the licenses anyway, right, in your area?
yes,
Yeah.
yep,
So if you're, it's great, like what a great tip for folks of like, hey, you go to the, you know, you can go to, you know, the ABD website or to the ABD like contact and say, great, I need all the retailers with the alcohol license from Dubuque County. And then, you know, you have that email access, because we can't just now, or we probably don't want to just now go randomly walking into like every convenience store in your county.
right.
The other thing I was thinking when you were talking, I'm curious if anyone has, oh, because like we were talking in one of our last meetings about our last webinars about the challenge of not being able to like physically be in the school or hang posters in the schools. I'm curious where so many schools are doing like where you can go like pick up a meal, like pick up a bag lunch or whatever it might be, if that's a point of contact of like if those folks are ever willing to like hand out a flyer about a meeting that's happening or hand out a postcard about something, or that might be a point of contact where we can't physically maybe at the moment be touching all of those, you know, folks, but could you give something to the people that are, so like, you know, that they are still having that contact of, you know, physically handing things to someone, that might be a an opportunity. We're right at the half hour. I want to take a minute here just to thank now I got to make sure I get everybody's names right, to thank Leslie for taking the time to be a co-presenter this afternoon. I absolutely also want to thank Chelsea and Alexis and Kitty and Lisa for being willing to jump on this webinar with many people and share their experience. Jody has reshared the link in the chat. Don't forget to navigate to that when you're ready to hang up. I understand that I'm sure people have things that they want to hop into their day, so we can close the webinar here, but I'll stay on for a couple of minutes. I think Leslie's got a couple of minutes, so I'm not sure about our other folks that have shared, if they have things to get to next. So if you've got a question that you would still like answered, or maybe a question you didn't want to ask in front of the other, you know, 96 people that are on the webinar with you, you are welcome to stay on. We'll hang out for a few minutes, but otherwise, thanks so much. I really, again, you know, appreciate the work that all of you are doing in difficult and challenging circumstances. And so I hope that you're all able to have a great, restful weekend. So thank you.